You all know what is Bruce protocol in treadmill test. Slowly we will be rising the elevation so that we will find where the angina comes. So also some questions are very easy, some are tough. So it is a perfect Bruce protocol. I hope that you are able to overcome the exercise stress test, because regularly you are put on a much bigger stress at our Sunday test at our center. So let's look at this. To start with the first question, Jefferson's fracture. As all of you know that Jefferson is the fracture across the first vertebrae, where it is a 4-part break fracture of the anterior and posterior arches of the vertebrae is what need to be remembered. It's a burst type of fracture, and generally C2 and C1 they will be together in the Jefferson's fracture. So this is how, if you take the radiologically, if you see, you can see both the anterior and posterior elements of the C1 vertebra suffering the fracture in the form of the Jeffersons. Where do you have the cock-up splint? It's a very common question. So a cock-up splint is basically applied in the radial nerve palsy because there is a risk drop. We don't want the impedance to the vascular and nerve supply, so we tend to facilitate the vascular and nerve supply by placing a cock-up splint is what need to be remembered. Within how much time pulmonary embolization follows the deep vein thrombosis in a given case of trauma? Honestly, I am not very sure. I have treated a lot of cases of pulmonary embolism giving urokinase. Is there any timetable, honestly speaking, that it happens exactly within 4 days, not beyond 4 days? But I am not very sure, because this question is said by one of our orthopedics postgraduate probably. So he must be seeing more number of cases. So I still consider 4 to 5 days after the injury, the pulmonary embolism as a complication is a valid possibility. Now let us talk about Seddon's classification. As all of you know, praxia is only, still the continuity is well maintained. Axonotmesis is, neural tube is intact but axons are disrupted, and neurotmesis is where it is being totally severed. So that's the reason option D is very much a valid statement, is what I like to underscore. Now what is Kocher's way of reduction of the dislocation of the shoulder? We need to remember that in the Kocher's maneuver, we will be externally rotating the arm gently by applying the downward traction on the humerus, and during external rotation with the downward traction, we will be following that with internal rotation and adduction. So that is what we do in the Kocher's maneuver. And also there is a modified Hippocrates maneuver also, as all of you know pretty well. Then what is a Galeazzi fracture? What is a Monteggia fracture? Now you're all Scud missiles about to face the entrance. So you're all very sure that Galeazzi is a radial shaft fracture with an associated distal radioulnar dislocation is basically called as the Galeazzi's fracture. If you take the AP radiograph, appearance will be like this, where there is an oblique or a transverse fracture of the radius. Along with that there is a dislocation of the distal ulna. The combination is basically called as the Galeazzi. Now in the sprained ankle and strained marriage, what is common between the two? Both of them are painful, and what is the treatment? Bed rest is the only way that a ligamental tear can any time be cured. So there is a reason we need to remember, anterior talofibular ligament is one of the most commonly involved ligament in the ankle sprain. Ankle sprain is more painful process than that of the fracture, as all of you know very well. Now in acute osteomyelitis, what is the earliest X-ray finding to appear? In fact, the first definite change which you will see is the soft tissue shadow immediately adjacent to the metaphysis. There is an increased size of the soft tissue shadow along with the density. But by about 2 weeks after the onset of illness, there is a wisp of periosteal reaction which will appear, which is the first radiological feature that you see. You can see here that the second metatarsal has suffered the osteomyelitis, and there is a development of a periosteal new bone formation, which is one of the early radiological feature that can be perceived, is what need to be remembered. Now in the infections of the hand, It is the acute paronychia. What is the most common organism? It is the Staphylococcus aureus which will be responsible for the acute paronychia is what need to be remembered. Now what is the order in which you will be resolving the CTEV, congenital Talipes equinovarus? Another very standard question. It is the adduction, internal rotation, and finally the equinus deformity which is being reduced while you are manipulating and reducing the club foot is what need to be basically remembered. Astasia and abasia. Do you have it in neurology or in psychiatry or in orthopedics? Where this question comes from? There are in fact all the possible causes. You have neurological, you have got psychiatric and also the orthopedic underlying causes. Basically astasia abasia means it is inability to either stand or to walk in a normal manner, and they show a dramatic gait disturbance, and they will basically show this gait disturbance only when one of the family member or the physician is in proximity to them. So this is basically a feature which is seen in the hysterical illness that is called the conversion disorder. We see the astasia abasia. But why is this important to be recognized? Because you must rule out the other possible organic lesions which also can lead to the development of the gait disturbance. Can you tell me which territorial stroke can lead to gait disturbance? Suppose if there is any anterior cerebral artery stroke, then that lead to monoparesis of the lower limb. So that can lead to development of a gait disturbance. Similarly, a posterior cerebral circulation can lead to the vertigo and giddiness and can affect the gait. So that's the reason any stroke, Parkinsonism, any flaccid paralysis of the Guillain-Barré, any of them can be the differential diagnosis for the astasia abasia is what need to be remembered. Then similarly, astasia abasia is also found in phobias like the stasophobia, basophobia, etc., etc. Now let us talk about otosclerosis. Carrat's notch, all of you know very well. Typically on audiometry, if you see the otosclerosis, there is a dip in the bone conduction threshold which happens at around 2000 of hertz, which is called the Carrat's notch, is what need to be remembered. This is a fundamental question. What is hypopharynx, epipharynx, oropharynx, etc., etc.? The superior boundary of the hypopharynx is the hyoid bone, and the piriform fossa, postcricoid area, and the posterior pharyngeal wall. All these three basically constitute the composition of what is called as the hypopharynx or laryngopharynx is what need to be remembered. Now how do you treat carcinoma of the larynx in situ, that is in the stage 0? Now I differ with the key that the answer as radiotherapy. See, once upon a time radiotherapy ruled the world in the management of carcinoma of larynx in situ. But now we are in the era of laser. With the laser you can strip out the lesions from the vocal cords. So that is the reason the stripping of the lesion out of the vocal cords is still considered to be the modern treatment of choice, which will score over that of the radiotherapy in many perspectives. So there is a reason I feel that stripping and radiotherapy have a almost an equal importance, with the laser based stripping scoring over that of the radiotherapy is what I like to specifically mention. Now let's go to the next question. What do you see in Meniere's disease? First of all, let us understand what is Tullio's phenomena, what is Tumarkin's crisis, etc., etc. You heard of this terminology? Must be a exam going ENT postgraduates question must be it is. But anyway, first time even I too read yesterday while preparing for this paper what is Tumarkin's crisis. But anyway, let us talk about it. Tullio is a great man who basically found that if you do tiny holes in the semicircular canals, then that lead to vertigo. What type of vertigo? The moment there is a noise, synchronized with that noise there is a vertiginous sensation. So this kind of a noise synchronized vertigo is basically called as the Tullios phenomena. And where do you see the sound induced vertigos? Whenever there is any fistula between the oval window or otic capsule or round window to any of the exterior, then that lead to the Tullios phenomena. So any superior canal dehiscence, any perilymphatic fistula, Meniere's syndrome also you have the Tullius syndrome and Tullios phenomena, and any post fenestration surgery also you have the Tullios phenomena is what need to be remembered. Then do you find Lermoyes syndrome in the Meniere's? Definitely. Lermoyes is basically a variant of Meniere's. What is the variation? The variation is there will be tinnitus and a diminished hearing, and following that there is a vertigo, and the hearing slowly will improve. So the Lermoyes also is a part of the Meniere's game only. Then what do you mean by Tumarkin's crisis? Tumarkin's is also called the otolithic crisis. In this, the patients will have a sudden drop attacks on the ground along with, without any of the other Meniere's symptoms. Generally Meniere's means classically you have all the triad of clinical features, but sometimes without anything only drop attacks can be a presenting feature of an endolymphatic hydrops of Meniere's, and in that scenario it is basically called as the otolithic crisis of the Tumarkin is what need to be remembered. So anyway, all of you know, answer is more easier actually. You need not see the other three options and think about them. That paracusis wilsii is a feature of the otosclerosis, not that of the Meniere's, all of you know very well. Now which conditions lead to the inner ear abnormalities basically? Any of the torch group of infections, and especially the drug thalidomide is the one which can be responsible for the development of the inner ear abnormalities. And inner ear abnormality can also be embryologically a part of certain syndromes, especially the Jervell-Lange-Nielsen syndrome and Usher's syndrome. You have the development of inner ear abnormalities. So anybody who has got an inner ear abnormality, how do you evaluate, doctor, in the newborn? Torch titers you have to do. Syphilis can lead to development of the inner ear inflammation. So FTA, ABS should be done, urine analysis and thyroid function test should be the part of your evaluation in a newborn with a hearing defect with the inner ear problem. Now let's go to the next question. In acoustic neuroma, I hope you didn't answer it as cranial nerve 8 because you are preparing for the entrance 2009. So you won't do such mistakes, I am very sure. It is the cranial nerve 5 which is the earliest to become involved. That's the reason cranial nerve 5, how do you test it, doctor? Simple test, corneal reflex. That's the reason the first to be lost in the acoustic neuroma sometimes, rather many times, would be the loss of the corneal reflex because of the early involvement of the 5th cranial nerve is what need to be remembered. Now how do you diagnose CSF rhinorrhea? Some questions we read for entrance and forget after entrance. One such question is CSF rhinorrhea, because tomorrow as a house surgeon or anybody, you are more worried whether it is a common cold mucus discharge or is it a real fracture. Especially in rainy season, somebody comes with a road traffic accident, you always have a confusion whether what I am seeing discharging from the nose. But you need to remember that beta 2 transferrin is a very specific marker in the CSF. It is also found in serum, nasal secretions, tears and saliva, but that is a beta 1 transferrin, but beta 2 transferrin is the one which is found in the CSF, which is a very important indicator, is what need to be remembered. Now what is Trotter syndrome, doctor? It is a unilateral deafness neuralgia affecting the trigeminal and the defective mobility of the soft palate. Whenever there is any tumor mass in the fossa of Rosenmuller is basically called as the Trotter syndrome. Then what is Costin syndrome? One of the options given, it is the discomfort, pain and jaw pathosis, especially whenever there is any pathology involving the temporomandibular joint. Then Sluder's neuralgia, another stock question in the entrance, is the sphenopalatine neuralgia, and there will be whenever the middle turbinate is pressing against the nasal septum, that will cause the irritation of the sphenopalatine and that lead to development of Sluder's neuralgia. Then lateral medullary syndrome of the Wallenberg is because of the occlusion of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. As all of you know, some signs will be ipsilateral, some clinical signs will be contralateral, especially vibration, touch, etc., which are communicated by posterior columns will be ipsilateral. Pain, temperature communicated by the spinothalamic tract will be contralateral, etc., etc. You must be sure on Wallenberg syndrome. Now, who is the tensor of the vocal cord, doctor? It is the cricothyroid, which is the only muscle, only laryngeal muscle, which is being innervated by the external branch of the superior laryngeal rather than recurrent laryngeal. Is the cricothyroid is what need to be basically remembered. Now, what is not a contraindication for direct laryngoscopy, placing the direct laryngoscope? I agree with cardiac decompensation as an answer. Definitely patient is in CHF and it can worsen. But a good number of intubations we often do even on a patient in florid cardiac decompensation, if it is an emergency intubation. Then trismus, you can't open the jaw. Where will you place the laryngoscope? Difficult. So it is a contraindication. But I still don't know whether diabetes is truly can be considered as the one which can escape the except about. Even diabetes is not a contraindication, at least I consider. So both C and D I feel could be the equally possible scenarios as the answers. Anyway, now let us talk about neurofibromatosis. A Lisch nodule is the hematomatous nevus which is affecting the iris, which is found in the neurofibromatosis of type 1 or 2. It is in the type 1 where you find the Lisch nodule. Then where do you see the Koepis and Busakas nodules, doctor? Whenever there is any granulomatous iritis and uveitis. So that is the reason we find it in sarcoidosis, tuberculosis, syphilis, Lyme's, leprosy and walked Koinagi-Harada syndrome. Any of the granulomatous inflammation of the iris leads to the development of the Koepi and Busakas nodules. Now the ocular manifestations of Hansen's disease is a truly postgraduate question in the final examination. So you must be pretty sure on this, that Hansen's can lead to iridocyclitis, which is plasmoid in nature. Similarly, Hansen's can involve the exposure keratitis leading to the development of the corneal scar, can be one of the ocular manifestations of Hansen's. Then Hansen's can lead to the corneal neovascularization and the iris pearls, which are the classical feature in the case of the Hansen's, is what need to be fundamentally understood. Finally, one of the options is brush field spots. Brush field spots are those grayish brown spots in the periphery of the iris. In the human eye, especially in the Down syndrome, classically you come across the brush field spots. Now, band keratopathy, where do you come across? Any condition that lead to development of hypercalcemic state can lead to development of deposition of the calcium salts and that can lead to band keratopathy. So hyperparathyroidism, renal failure, hypophosphatasia, milk alkali syndrome, Paget sarcoidosis, any of them can lead to development of hypercalcemia severe enough to lead to the development of the band keratopathy is what need to be remembered. This is how you can see the calcium deposits in a patient who was receiving dexamethasone. The calcium levels are elevated and that is leading to the development of a band keratopathy with a persistent epithelial defect is what you are able to see here. Then one of the options given was angioid streaks. This can become a very potential question in the next entrance which is going to come. So it is the Brooks membrane, a defect in Brooks membrane lead to the development of the angioid streak. The moment we say angioid streak, what is that one systemic connective tissue condition that you will remember, doctor? Pseudoelasticum. That is pseudoxanthomatous elasticum is the condition which you need to basically remember. Similarly, in certain hemoglobinopathies also you find the angioid streaks, and there are a list of systemic conditions which we will give you in the printout which also can lead to hemoglobinopathies, can also lead to angioid streak. So if you take the retinal angiogram, you can see the defect in the Brooks membrane, and angioid streak can lead to subretinal hemorrhage. Lastly, black cataract, called the cataract nigra, is the lens which is hardened and has assumed a black pigmentation is called the black cataract. Now let us talk about trachoma. How do we compose MCQs, doctor? It's very simple. We must know antonyms and synonyms in medicine. Suppose if it leads to entropion, put ectropion in the option so that it is not seen, because entropion is seen. But let me tell you that in the late stages of trachoma, we see even ectropion also, because one of the, though it is most rare, so with a small correction that we still can find ectropion, rather the rarest out of all the things would be the ectropion to be found in the trachoma, is what need to be remembered. Now tell me, doctor, what is the common cause for the development of ectropion? Any cicatrizing condition of the lid can lead to development of ectropion. For example, you can see the chronic blepharitis with lamellar ichthyosis with the cicatrical legophthalmos, along with the lower lid ectropion is being found. So the ectropion can be congenital or it can be acquired. When it is acquired ectropion, it can be involutional, paralytic, cicatrical, mechanical, and it can be seen in any chronic dermatitis, and the late stages of the trachoma it can be found is what need to be remembered. So that's the reason probably with a caveat that it is the rarest out of all, but otherwise you find tylosis, trichiosis and entropion very much very commonly seen in the case of the trachoma is what need to be remembered. So the moment you have this trichiasis and entropion along with the scarring of the conjunctiva, what stage of trachoma you call it as? You call it as a stage 4 trachoma is what need to be basically remembered. Now a young patient with recurrent vitreous hemorrhage with the onset of blindness in a country where tuberculosis is prevalent, what is your answer, doctor? Eales disease is a hypersensitivity vasculitis where hypersensitivity is against the tuberculin protein, and the vasculitis leads to vitreous hemorrhage, which is typically seen in the case of the Eales disease is what need to be basically remembered. So if you do a fluorescein angiogram in the Eales, you can see all that peripheral retinal neovascularization with the leakage which is happening, classical of the Eales disease. Similarly, the vascular tortuosity and the peripheral retinal neovascularization, they are the hallmarks on fundoscopy in the case of the Eales disease is what I like to once more underscore. Now all the extraocular muscles, from where do they originate from? There is a ring of Ginn, Ginn's annulus it is called as. So annulus of Ginn gives rise to everything except the inferior oblique, which comes separately from the orbital surface of the maxilla. It will be originating and it is the odd man out of all the extraocular muscles. So you can see this is the inferior oblique, and it does not come from the ring of Ginn, rather it comes separately from that of the medial surface of the maxilla is what you need to remember. In bronchial asthma, you can't use a non-selective beta blocker like the timolol, non-selective beta blocker, which can precipitate the cardiac arrhythmias and bronchial asthma as the important adverse effect. 25-year-old using the spectacles suddenly develops photopsia, sudden loss of vision, and our ophthalmology PG is doing the indirect ophthalmoscopy. What is he looking for? So you must be pretty sure that this kind of clinical story talks about retinal detachment. And how do you diagnose the retinal detachment? The initial symptoms can be photopsia, and indirect ophthalmoscopy is a definitive means where with the scleral indenting you can be able to see the presence of the detachment basically. I'll give you a classical picture. These are the two retinal tears along with the detachment, which can be seen very much by indirect ophthalmoscopy becomes the initial investigation in a suspected case of retinal detachment. Cataract undoubtedly is the most common cause of the blindness in India, and in retinitis pigmentosa, what do you see? We see the tunnel vision, that means central vision is spared. So who is responsible for central vision and the color vision? The macular area. So that is the reason the involvement of the macula does not occur in the early stages, it occurs only in the late stages, That is the reason until late the central vision is still retained with the loss of the peripheral vision, which lead to development of the tunnel vision, which you see in the case of the retinitis pigmentosa, is what need to be remembered. Retinitis pigmentosa, another favorite question is, it is a part of Usher syndrome, and you see the typical bone spicule formation, which is classical picture, bony spicules is what you see in retinitis pigmentosa. Now if you do the electroretinogram, what do you see in, expect in retinitis pigmentosa? The A wave and the B wave typically become reduced in the electroretinogram, which is a very classical feature of the retinitis pigmentosa. Now let us talk about congenital glaucoma. It is bilateral, and what is the underlying cause for it, doctor? There is a congenital problem with the canal of Schlemm and the drainage of the aqueous humor. That's the reason surgery is the primary modality of treatment, not the medical management in the case of the congenital glaucoma. Either you do goniotomy or you will be doing trabeculotomy in the management of congenital glaucoma is what need to be remembered. Systemic inflammatory response syndrome, what do you come across? There are 4 important criteria to clinically diagnose the SIRS: fever more than 38 or less than 36, heart rate more than 30 and respiratory rate more than 20, and PSCO2 of less than 32. They are the part of the definition of SIRS is what need to be remembered. Now some of the suture material are absorbable and some are non-absorbable, and by now I think you are all very sure at the end of housemanship what is absorbable and what is non-absorbable among the sutures. So you have the surgical plain gut, the chromic gut, Dexone, Vicryl, Maxone, which is monofilament glycolic acid, they are all basically absorbable sutures. So the polydioxanone, which was developed in 1980, is a polymer of polydrinone, and it has a complete absorption of this suture within about 180 days. The material is very commonly used. So that's the reason polydioxanone is the absorbable suture material out of all this. Whereas the cotton, silk, ethylone, proline, etc., they are all the non-absorbable sutures. Intraoperative radiotherapy we basically use in the case of the pancreatic cancer, as all of you know. Now Hogarth-Pringles maneuver, which is used in order to decrease the amount of bleeding into the lesser omentum while you are operating on the biliary tree. What do you basically occlude in that? You will be occluding the hepatic artery and also portal vein. Even portal vein is also occluded as a part of it. No problem. When 200 questions are set, as our president, respected president has said that it is a laborious process when they have collected questions from everywhere, screened it, and then finally brought out the paper in such a short time. We may have a couple of questions with options here and there, doesn't matter. But anyway, I think instead of portal vein we can put another option, hepatic vein, so that only answer would be then hepatic artery. So that would be a better way. Okay. Now let's go to the next question. If there is air in biliary tree, then what is a diagnostic of? Pneumobilia. So this is a right upper quadrant ultrasound which shows that there is the air which is marked here, you are able to see in the biliary duct. Now similarly, if you do a CT upper abdomen, it also shows that there is a air in the biliary duct. Basically biliary tree is like the God given highly compact structure where you don't expect air or water inside it. If there is a air, what is the only possibility? Either you have done an intervention like a papillotomy endoscopically, so that you have opened up the space and pushed the air into it, one possibility. Second is the biliary tree with one of the intestinal gas containing structures, there is a fistula. That is another possibility. So similarly, this is another example in the gallbladder fossa. You can see the contracted gallbladder which is containing the air, another classical scenario. So any cholecystocolic fistula of the gallbladder cancer or following the papillotomy, we see the air within the biliary tree is what has to be remembered. If there is a cryptorchid testis, it has a high vulnerability to seminoma. So before 2 years, why do you basically do orchidopexy? To retain fertility. But at 10th year or 12th year you discovered cryptorchid, why you still need to basically take care of that? Because it has an inherent tendency, if you leave it alone, that it can transform into seminoma. Hence, even at 10 to 12 years you find it, you need to basically surgically intervene in the case of the cryptorchid testis is what need to be remembered. Medullary carcinoma of the thyroid, the red proto-oncogene encodes for the tyrosine kinase, which is implicated in Hirschsprung's disease, multiple endocrinal neoplasia of type 2A and 2B, and pheochromocytoma, parathyroid tumors, the red proto-oncogene is very much implicated. What is red, doctor? Red is rearranged during transfection, is the shortcut acronym for the red proto-oncogene. So I leave you with the explanatory booklet where what are the various categories of proto-oncogenes and what is their underlying function, who are tyrosine kinases, etc., etc. You must be pretty sure, because one question comes definitely on the topic of oncogenes. Now where do you do Anderson-Hines operation? What is the common cause for hydronephrosis, doctor, in your patients? Somebody, a young 30 or 34 comes with UTI, with fever, with sepsis, and ultrasound was done, hydronephrosis is found. What is the general underlying cause? Is there any congenital cause for that? There can be a pelviureteric junction fibrosis and stenosis, which is the predisposing factor for the development of hydronephrosis. So how do you relieve the pelviureteric junction stenosis, which is predisposing to hydronephrosis? First you will do the renal function test. If the kidney is still functioning, you can retain the kidney. Then you will be placing, basically repairing that narrowing of the pelviureteric junction, placing a stent. That is one way you repair. Then suppose if hydronephrosis is in a very bad shape and the narrowing is severe and very long standing nature, how do you basically treat it? For that we will be doing the Hines-Anderson's operation whenever there is any ureteropelvic junction obstruction leading to the development of the hydronephrosis is what need to be remembered. Similarly, Foley's YV-plasty is called a non-dismembered type of repair, whereas the Anderson-Hines surgery is basically called dismembered type of repair of hydronephrosis is what need to be remembered. So this is how, if you do the intravenous pyelogram in a patient with ureteropelvic junction, you can see the presence of the hydronephrotic kidney, from where the entire story will begin. Now a 45-year-old man, if there is a suspicious cervical lymph node, do you want to do FNAC or do you want to do the excision biopsy? Excision biopsy is a Supreme Court judgment. There is no further appeal for it. So that is the reason it is the one which is superior to that of the FNAC of the lymph node. Now a carcinoid is being found which is of around 2.5 centimeters. How do you repair it? It is a segmental resection which is considered to be the treatment of choice. Now let us talk about thyroid cancer. How do you define a micro carcinoma basically? Once upon a time we used to use the word called occult papillary carcinoma, but nowadays we are using the word microcarcinoma once the size is less than 1.5 centimeters in diameter is what need to be remembered. Then Hurthle cell carcinoma is the one which can be found in Hurthle cell changes can be found in Hashimoto's, Graves and multinodular goiter in all these scenarios, as all of you know. Now what is a Rigler's sign? Where do you come across Rigler's sign? Rigler's is also called the double wall sign, which is found in the pneumoperitoneum, where what happens in pneumoperitoneum? The air which is there in the intestine will go into the peritoneum. So already intestine inside it is having air, outside also there is an air. So air and air will stand and the wall will be, intestinal wall will be between the two air columns. So this visibility of, I'll show you here, this visibility of the wall prominently between the two air columns is basically called the Wriggler sign, which is suggestive of the presence of the pneumoperitoneum. Then if there is a gross pneumoperitoneum, that can lead to the elevation of the hemidiaphragm, and sometimes it can lead to pneumoperitoneum gas, can lead to a oval radiolucency in the shape of an American football in a supine abdominal X-ray, which is called as the football sign, is what need to be remembered. Now what do you mean by FAST? FAST is the focused abdominal sonography for trauma. Whenever a patient of abdominal trauma is paraded to casualty, just like in the last 10 days before entrance exam, you quickly review the high yield topics, you should do a high yield ultrasound. You can't do CT, MRI, etc., and patient can't be put like that. So this kind of a screening ultrasound which is done cursorially in the cases of the trauma of the abdomen, in order to detect for any sort of a injury, we call it as the focused abdominal sonography in trauma. So we divide the abdomen into hypochondrium, epigastrium, loin, umbilicus, in iliac fossa and hypogastrium, and we look into perihepatic, perisplenic, pelvic and pericardial spaces in order to see for the presence of any fluid collection. Now, in an abdominal trauma, what is the sensitivity of detection by using the FAST technique, FAST technique? What is the sensitivity of detection in solid organ injury? It is good, but not the best. But if you look at hollow viscous injury, it is poor. So hollow viscous injury may go undetected with the FAST technique, whereas solid organ injury can be moderately identified, and a sensitive technique it is. Similarly, the Morrison's pouch is more sensitive, any detection of the Morrison's pouch fluid collection. It is more sensitive to detect any collection. And it is less sensitive than the Morrison pouch for the fluid detection in the pouch of Douglas and the paracolic gutter. In these areas it is less sensitive to detect. So that's how there is a lot of sensitivity studies about the FAST approach is what need to be remembered. What is your answer for this question? Subarachnoid hemorrhage, what is the most common cause? Yes? Berry aneurysms, right? It's a uniform answer. But if I ask you a question, isolated subarachnoid hemorrhage in pediatric population, what is your answer? Their trauma is the answer. So that is the reason I still consider berry aneurysm is a possibility, but trauma, if it were to be the, what was the key given? Key is given to you? Trauma was given? Okay. Trauma is definitely an answer if it is isolated subarachnoid hemorrhage in the pediatric population, then the trauma becomes the most common cause, is what need to be remembered. Now in fistula in ano, what is the gold standard of investigation? We use a 7 to 10 megahertz transducer in an endoanal and endorectal ultrasound, but that is not the gold standard. It is the MRI which shows with 82, you can see the fistula strat here, the fistula in ano, 80 to 90% concordance with the operative findings will be there. You can see the Goodsall's rule also, the way the curvature of the fistula in ano. MRI is a wonderful investigation and considered to be a gold standard. Passing the skeletons means passing the calcium into the urine is a feature of the hyperparathyroidism, where they show hypercalciuria and multiple stones. Extradural is arterial blood and subdural is venous blood, as all of you know very well. And where do you find lucid interval, doctor? In the case of the extradural hemorrhage. Where do you use Veress needle? Veress needle is used in the case of the laparoscopy. Through that you will be blowing the carbon dioxide into the abdomen and creating the pneumo-abdomen. That is what you do with the Veress needle for the insufflation of the carbon dioxide at the time of the laparoscopy. Now 50 kg adult man with 40% burns in the first 8 hours, how much of fluid do you want to give? The basic Partland's formula, all of you are experts in this topic, that it is 4 ml kg per body weight per percentage. So 4 into 50 into 40 is equal to 8000 ml. Half of this volume, 4000 ml, should be given in the first 8 hours, as all of you know very well. Now the patient has got sweating, he has got erythema, etc., etc. What is the syndrome called? Freiss syndrome. So how do you manage Freiss syndrome, doctor? You can give botulinum toxin type A or surgical transection of that anomalously innervating nerve fibers, or you can also apply an ointment which has got an anticholinergic property like scopolamine. Any of them are the choices to overcome the sweating over the cheek in the case of the Freiss syndrome is what need to be basically remembered.